Man, I sure do love being a Coast Guard in 1972. But I sure hope that nothing ambushes me as I pass this narrow corner. Total Chaos is a survival horror game running on the GZ Doom engine made almost entirely by one guy over the course of about 6 years. Over the years it had numerous iterations, starting off in 2012 as an Amnesia-like Run from the Monster type game. It makes sense for the time. In the early 2010s that style of horror game was insanely popular on YouTube. It transitioned into being more of an open-world stalker style of game before finally landing on the more typical linear experience we have today. All of this being done on the GZ Doom engine, by the way. Yes, this and this are running on the same engine. Put lightly, the game is a bit of a technical achievement, but it's not without its hiccups. I've read that other people have issues with frame drops and the game crashing. I have a pretty good computer and the game never crashed for me and only ever dipped in frame rate in certain outdoor areas, so your mileage may vary. Another oddity I ran into was to do with the fact that I played the game on a 1440p monitor, of which this game's HUD elements don't scale to match the width of. It's nothing game-breaking by any means, it's just like this health bar is supposed to be in the corner, but it's a bit further towards the center of the screen. This issue also carries over with certain in-your-face visual effects. The screen flashes a bright red whenever you take damage, but as you can see here, the very edges of the screen don't change color at all. None of these issues were serious enough to cause me to look for a fix of any kind. I'm just explaining why the game pretends the edges of my screen don't exist. With that out of the way, let's talk about the actual video game. The intro cutscene gives little tangible information. What we can gather is that the main character is a Coast Guard, they get stranded at sea trying to rescue someone and then end up on an island that they recognize as Fort Oasis. All we're told is that the Coast Guard has been to Fort Oasis before and knows that a mining community lives there. But something's wrong. Where there was once a mining community, there is now a clusterfuck of body horror, depressing imagery, and a whole lot of gray and brown. The game has a very ruined, worn-down art style. Every building or other sign of human civilization looks utterly decrepit, being decayed and demolished beyond belief, giving the impression that most of the structures on Fort Oasis were built during the fall of Rome. Occasionally, the desolate concrete wasteland becomes decorated by blood and mutilated corpses. It's something different, but it's hardly a relief from the already dreary visuals. Also placed among the gray and brown is overt wall messages written with an undercurrent of depression and hopelessness, some of them being a lot more overt than others. This sort of ties into the story, and if you've already figured out what's going on, good for you, but don't spoil it for the people in the back. The many denizens you encounter in Fort Oasis also look really good. Well, as good can be for this type of game. There's a very nice mix of enemies, from ones that just kinda look like dudes to malformed, blood-soaked grotesquerie. Even with such a limited color palette, every enemy looks unique and immediately recognizable at a glance, which is beyond impressive. Saying that the island looks uncomfortable would be an understatement, and its looks are complemented by an effective ambient soundscape. In the few moments that you're not fighting enemies, whatever area you happen to be in, you can feel it. The isolation. Total Chaos doesn't have much in the way of music. Areas just have their own distinctly unsettling ambient tracks. The quality of the monster sounds matches the environments, sounding vaguely human but being very obviously mutated. And just like their visual design, every monster also sounds completely unique, making them instantly recognizable even if you can't see them. Once again, extremely impressive. Even beyond the expected enemy noises, the game isn't shy of communicating itself to the player through other ways, making excellent use of subtle audio cues. When you get spotted by an enemy, you'll hear two noises. That specific enemy's alert sounds, which I just talked about, but you'll also hear a jump scare stinger. This adds and removes tension in equal parts. On the one hand, you always know when you're in danger. On the other hand, you're informed of this by an abrasive jump scare noise, and there's more information that you're still lacking. You know when you're in danger, but you won't always know what, how many, and what direction. Having audio and visual clarity this good in a horror game with like 2 colors is insanely impressive. Moving on, whenever you take heavy damage, you can hear the Coast Guard's heart pounding out of his chest, and his vision will start to twitch and shudder involuntarily. I like this a lot because it's an immersive character detail, but also can be used to warn the player to back off without them needing to look at their health. I'll touch on the audio again later, but in order to do that, I have to talk about the combat. Combat in Total Chaos is quite unique, purely by virtue of it not being shit. The melee combat is very simple and very satisfying. You have a 3-hit light attack, and a charge-up heavy attack. This is the standard for most melee weapons, though some can't heavy attack. You also have a dash, which is used to avoid enemy attacks. But the dash also makes you sprint for a few seconds, making the move double as a means of fast level traversal. All of these moves have their own slight nuances, enhancing their individual effectiveness in certain situations. For the light attack chain, each hit does more damage than the last, rewarding you for putting yourself in extremely close proximity to an enemy for an uncomfortable amount of time. The heavy attack slows you down while charging, disables your dash, and artificially narrows your field of view with a vignette effect. But when executing the move, you lunge forward, enabling you to hit faraway targets. This forward lunge also grants you a large amount of speed for a couple of seconds, letting you get out of harm's way. Did you notice the Coast Guard's breathing in that clip? That's the sound of the stamina bar, which ties all of these mechanics together and heavily restricts the player, forcing them to think carefully about their actions in combat. All of the actions I just talked about consume varying amounts of stamina. Light attacks use a bit, dashes use a lot, and fully charged heavy attacks use the entire bar. The damage of the heavy attack scales with the amount of stamina consumed, capping out at full stamina. So you want to charge it as much as possible to get as much damage as possible. But when you have noisy-ass Tentacle Man here trying to show you his new favorite hentai move, it can be hard to concentrate on looking at the stamina bar. This is where the sound design comes back in. You don't have to look at the bar at all. Listen closely. You can hear a similar bassy thud whenever you kill an enemy. A couple of enemies have weird death animations, so this is much appreciated. Oh yeah, I forgot to talk about throwables. Around the environment you can find rocks, bricks, empty bottles, and later on in the game, explosives. Skip it up and that up! Terrible memes aside, to be honest, I never found much use for them in combat. Anything they could do, the guns could do better. Well, at least they can be used to activate switches. Oh wait, actually the guns can do that too. Okay. The guns in Total Chaos are, mostly, a joy to use. They're varied, satisfying, and utterly devastating. The first gun you can get in the game is the shotgun, about an hour in, and it's easily the strongest weapon in the game. Yes, in this horror game, the shotgun is the first firearm you acquire, and not, say, some rinky-dink piece of shit pistol that does no damage and stops being useful about 30 minutes after you get it. The shotgun is capable of one-hit killing almost any enemy in the game, and actually retains effectiveness at a distance more than 2 inches away from your face. You know, kinda like in real life. Its raw power has a fire rate to match. Despite being pump action, the Coast Guard has no issues with slam firing shells out of it like he's on a hunting trip sponsored by General Patton. All this power does come at a drawback. Ammo for this gun is rare. Not rare to the point of never getting to use the thing, but rare enough to make you think twice before you shoot. The ammo also has a weight, which... No, not yet. We're still having a good time. Let's not ruin it. The next gun you acquire is, oh god. Oh, this thing. This pistol sucks, and is rendered mostly obsolete by a better weapon acquired less than an hour later, and completely rendered obsolete by another weapon acquired around 2 hours later. So why is it like this? Well, I think I know the answer. Time to talk about something I probably should have brought up at the start of the video, because script writing is hard. Total Chaos comes in 2 versions, the original version and the director's cut. Everything in this video has been footage of the director's cut. Functionally they're the same game, but with the major difference being the director's cut has a lot more stuff in it, including guns. In the original version, the pistol and the shotgun were the only 2 guns available, making the pistol's power level more reasonable. But in the director's cut, there's a lot more guns that fulfill kinda the same role of the pistol in variously more effective and efficient ways, leading to the poor old OG Luger getting basically shafted in favor of the hot new guns in the director's cut. Speaking of hot new guns, let's quickly move away from this highly efficient piece of German engineering and talk about the only fully automatic gun in the game. The submachine gun does very low damage, but is a laser beam with a high magazine capacity. Its strength comes in its ability to effectively crowd control enemies by repeatedly staggering them and to finish off heavily wounded enemies. It is very efficient in both of these respects because its ammo is found in very high quantities and it doesn't weigh anything. Not yet, it's too soon. 4 chapters into the game, you can get the Revolver, which is for all intents and purposes a side grade to the submachine gun. Its ammo shares the same properties of the submachine gun, but is less focused on crowd control utility, favoring higher lethality. This gun hits hard, almost as hard as the shotgun, is effective at any range, and is pinpoint accurate. The one drawback is the low fire rate. You need to pull the hammer of the Revolver back between each shot. The Revolver excels when used to quickly drop packs of weaker enemies from a distance before bringing out the big guns for the bigger enemies. I just realized I forgot about the harpoon gun, which is acquired before the submachine gun. It does very high damage with equally high accuracy at range, but it's hardly worth using due to the fact that ammo for it is incredibly rare and also weighs a lot. I can't avoid it anymore. We have to talk about the inventory system. It's basically a copy of the inventory from Stalker, being a grid system with a weight limiter. You have to manage the Coast Guard's hunger level, radiation level, stamina level, and stop bleeding. There's also a basic crafting system, smack some stuff together in a specific way, and some other stuff pops out. Neat. As far as inventories go, this is how I like it, because logistically it actually makes sense. An overcoat is the size of an overcoat and a syringe is the size of a syringe. The weight limiter or managing your meters isn't even that much of a problem. The problem is that this game just gives you too much stuff. Let's talk about the health items for a second because it'll illustrate my point well. There's 2 main healing methods, first aid kits and stim packs. First aid kits are rare, heal you for only about 1/6 of your health, and weigh quite a bit. You get just enough of them to keep you going while not being starved of them and forced to F6 and F9 your way through the entire game. These first aid kits are well thought out. No matter what you choose, you'll always be losing something. Hoard them and you'll quickly become over-encumbered. Overuse them and you might find yourself without healing items. Or you would if the fucking stim packs didn't exist. They heal you for slightly more than a first aid kit and weigh only a fraction as much. Using them has some drawbacks though. You'll bleed slightly since you're stabbing yourself with a syringe, and also heavily increase your hunger meter. I see what the idea was here, making a healing item that's more efficient logistically but more detrimental to your overall well-being. It's a neat idea that's executed poorly for 2 crucial reasons. Number 1, the downsides to using the stim packs are incredibly negligible. And 2, These stim packs are fucking everywhere. Just look at how many you can end up with. You're lucky to be carrying around 5 or 6 first aid kits, but on average you'll be able to hold on to at least 20 stim packs. The problems mentioned with these healing items extend to nearly all of the items. Some food increases your radiation, necessitating the need for some curing pills, except it doesn't matter for almost the entire game because there is more than enough food items that don't increase your radiation. You can craft makeshift weapons like shivs and hammers, but there's no point since you'll always have more than enough crafting materials to make the much more powerful melee weapons like axes, sledges, and knives. Total Chaos gives you so much that playing as efficiently as possible actively makes the game less fun. Here's possibly the best example. You can find boxes with loot in them all over Fort Oasis, and breaking them with a melee weapon has a slight problem. Every melee weapon in Total Chaos has durability, except for one. The wrench, which you can acquire about 20 minutes into the game, is unbreakable. So the natural solution here is to use the wrench on the boxes so you don't spend valuable durability of other weapons, right? Well, the problem with that is that the wrench does extremely low damage, so breaking boxes with it while efficient is extremely slow and boring. It's honestly much more enjoyable to just ignore the wrench completely and manage the durability of other weapons the game showers you with. I have to stop. I've spent like 10 hours looking at footage of me clicking through an inventory. Where was I? Yeah, something about combat? Well, I pretty much covered everything I wanted to, but Total Chaos is also supposed to be a horror game, right? So, is Total Chaos actually scary? Sometimes. The general tension level across the entire game is quite low, and that's due to it kind of doing the same thing over and over. Its absolute favorite trick is hiding an enemy right around a corner to pounce on you, giving you very little time to react. Sometimes they'll use an item or other enemies as bait for this. It's a bit of a shame with how constant it is throughout the entire game, because what few moments the game doesn't do that are genuinely scary and a lot of fun. There's one sequence in particular that made me drop the game for a while because I couldn't handle it. Let's talk about one of the enemy types. I couldn't find a name for this thing anywhere, so I'm just gonna call it the statue. It behaves similarly to Weeping Angels and the Peanut, but less extreme. Like those other enemies, this thing is completely invincible.
Don't care.
If you're not looking, you can hear it running towards you, and I've honestly never been more terrified of a pitter-patter sound in my life. As it gets closer, you'll also start hearing this shrill siren sound. As expected, if you're looking directly at it, it stands still, but rather unnervingly it doesn't freeze, and in fact will turn and retain eye contact with you no matter where you are, giving the impression that it can close the gap at any time, it just doesn't want to. Even when you're looking at this enemy, you're not safe. Whether you're looking or not, if you get too close, the statue will explode and insta-kill you. So what's this about? Why are you going into so much detail about a glorified level hazard, you hack? Well, the first time you encounter this enemy is nothing special. You only have to avoid one of them in a pretty open area that has lots of line of sight breaks, letting you learn the enemy. The next time you encounter it is what nearly broke me the first time I played the game. You're stuck in a claustrophobic little apartment floor with about 4 or 5 of these statues. With how they're placed in the area and how many line of sight breaks there are, it is physically impossible to be looking at all of them at once. Going through this section was a hell of hearing sirens and pitter-pattering coming from seemingly all different directions as I try to quickly dash through the area, but not so fast that I accidentally slam into one of them and die. There's a couple other parts that got to me, but that apartment floor took a few years off my life, and I don't regret going through it even slightly. Before I move on, there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that's how the game handles light. In other horror games, the areas are typically incredibly dark, and you have a flashlight or a lantern or something to navigate them. Total Chaos is a bit different than that. You don't have a flashlight, and there are very few dark areas. The way you get past these dark areas is with a small consumable flare. It lights up a small area around you for about 30 seconds before fizzling out. You only get these flares if there's a dark area around, so you know when it's coming. With the knowledge that your supply of these flares is incredibly finite, and the fact that they only light up an area of about 2 square feet around you, you're probably thinking, man, I sure hope there's no areas where you're stuck in the dark for a prolonged period of time. Yeah. That's enough. I don't want to spoil all of the spooky stuff, so let's talk about level design instead. Most levels take on a pseudo-Metroidvania approach. Typically you're dropped into a level with one objective in it, but it's inaccessible due to it being locked away or otherwise. Sometimes the way through this is very linear, other times the level is a lot more sprawling and open-ended. There was a lot of effort put forth to make each area feel unique and serve a purpose. No level felt tacked on. Okay, one of the levels feels pretty tacked on. Chapter 7 is... I don't know, it's not bad, I'm just not sure why it exists. Every other chapter has its own self-contained objective revealed to you at the start of the level, but the only noteworthy thing that happens in Chapter 7 is at the very start of the level, and it happens in Chapter 8 as well. Beyond that, the level is about 30 minutes of killing dudes, picking stuff up, backtracking, and then it just ends. Like I said, it's not bad, it just feels like unnecessary padding. But yeah, outside of Chapter 7, the levels are a lot of fun and do their best to keep you guessing with set pieces, scenery changes, unique enemies, all the good stuff. Every level had something unique worth remembering. Almost every level. With all that out of the way, the only thing I really have left to talk about is the story, and without spoiling too much, it definitely seems like an afterthought compared to the rest of the game. Skip to this timestamp if you don't want spoilers. The story of Total Chaos is another one of those indie game, introspective, psychological horror trips where, like, nothing is real, just this picture right here, yeah. About 10 minutes into the game, you're introduced to, this guy. I'm just gonna call him Radio because that's what the game calls him. Radio is the source of your objectives throughout the entire game. Your ultimate goal is to go to the mines on Fort Oasis because, Mr. Radio said so.
On the north side of the island, a mine awaits us down there, and the deepest point is where we need to go.
Whenever you come across an obstacle, Radio always knows how to overcome it and point you in the right direction, but despite this, he doesn't seem completely trustworthy. He speaks in terms that imply you and him have been friends or otherwise related for a while, and yet you have no idea who he is.
We have been here before, during better times.
He sometimes confides things in you that imply that mentally he doesn't seem to be doing well.
I've been isolated in this place. It has been suffocating.
There are certain places on the island that he adamantly insists you don't go to.
There is nothing to find down there. Head to the storage room.
What does this mean? What is he playing at? The answer is only really revealed at the very end, but we can piece it together using journal entries found around the environment. Now, the order that you find these notes in is pretty scrambled, and I'm gonna try my best to abridge this for brevity, so if I make a mistake, sorry. The Coast Guard's name is Tyler Scott. I'm only mentioning that in the spoiler section because it's only directly confirmed at the end of the game.
Welcome home, Tyler.
It's heavily implied through notes that even before initially arriving to Fort Oasis, Tyler was struggling with an unknown disease. We're not told hardly anything about it, only that it severely impacted Tyler's mental state, causing brain shivers and eventually requiring extensive therapy. The actual story starts almost exactly like the intro cutscene. Tyler as a Coast Guard getting stranded at sea and ending up at Fort Oasis is the same, but in this note it has very different connotations. Fort Oasis is made out to be a very happy place. The people there pretty much saved Tyler's life, he made a lot of friends, and he found a girlfriend there as well. Tyler loved the island so much that he didn't want to move back onto the mainland. He wanted to stay in the only place where the worries of his condition didn't eat away at him. So what the fuck happened to turn Tyler's paradise into this? Well, Tyler's insistence on staying in Fort Oasis is part of why it's such a miserable place, but it's not the only reason. Over time, Tyler's relations with everyone on the island started to completely break down. Co-workers and people who he could once call friends became abusive and berated him over very minute things. His girlfriend felt trapped on the island and left without really saying anything, only leaving behind a note. These two events severely impacted Tyler's mental state, all the while his physical health continued to deteriorate to the point of the doctors on Fort Oasis telling him his best course of action is to leave the island. Due to how remote of a location Fort Oasis is, the doctors there don't have the proper equipment to treat Tyler's disease. On all sides, Tyler is screamed at to go back to the mainland, but he doesn't want to because this island is the one place that he feels secure and at ease, free from the worries of his condition. But there's a new issue that Tyler is slowly starting to become aware of. Fort Oasis, or something on it, is actively worsening his condition. So with the environment itself demanding he leave, he's left with no choice. So Tyler temporarily leaves Fort Oasis to see a doctor back in Clearwater, the mainland town where he worked as a Coast Guard, and there, Tyler's worst fears are confirmed. Tyler receives a diagnosis, and the disease ravaging his body is revealed to be stage 3B lung cancer. This is why Tyler couldn't stay in Fort Oasis, why his girlfriend was so insistent on leaving, why his friends and co-workers started hating him out of nowhere. They were trying to get him to leave out of concern for his health. A remote island that is literally a giant coal mine is the last place a person suffering from lung cancer should be. Tyler gathers his things from the island and moves back to Clearwater so that the more well-equipped doctors there can better care for him, promising himself that when he's free of the disease he'll move back to Fort Oasis. It takes a long time, but eventually Tyler fully recovers and is cancer-free. So he looks into moving back to Fort Oasis only to discover it's been completely abandoned. The idealistic island paradise is dead. The people inhabiting it, including Tyler's girlfriend, all moving on to different things and putting the island in their past. Even though he is now fine physically, mentally, Tyler is still a wreck. Being forced to abandon the one place he called home and then learning that there was no point in returning crushed him. The Fort Oasis that we go through in the game doesn't really exist. It seems to be more of a purgatory for Tyler's increasingly damaged mind. You've probably figured it out by now, but radio is meant to be a representation of the dark parts of Tyler's mind. If you do everything he says, Tyler commits suicide at the end of the game.
There was no other way. Even when we beat the disease, it was still a death sentence. She left us, everyone left us. The isolation, the loneliness. I don't have to take it anymore.
This isn't your only option. While playing through the game, there's a few occasions where you can directly disobey radio in order to get a better ending. Break through the floor in the graveyard in Chapter 2. Don't kill the boss in Chapter 3. Don't burn the trapped dudes in Chapter 4. Go back into the darkness to find a note in Chapter 6. Don't kill the forgotten ones in Chapters 7 and 8. If you do all of these things, you get the good ending, where radio says that he's wrong. And then you walk into a big green grassy field, there's a fade to white, and then it ends. What the fuck? Yeah, this is kinda what I meant when I said the story was an afterthought. Most of this is left up to player interpretation, which is fine, I like it when games do that, but almost everything else is told to you through journal entries. The core problem with the story of Total Chaos is that it inflicts extreme mental and emotional trauma on a silent protagonist. There's really no room to feel empathetic when all you can really empathize with is a piece of paper. The setup with the journals is pretty good, but both endings just don't really have any payoff. It's like, oops, bad ending, and yay, good ending. The whole thing is in dire need of an actual epilogue. No need to super overdo it, just a text screen saying how Tyler is getting better if you got the good ending or getting deader if you got the bad ending. Some more voiced characters besides radio and that funny stand-up comedy head on a stick might have helped just to recontextualize the story. But even then, I can't say that in good conscience. A major theme across the entire game is isolation and loneliness, and having too many vocal characters would somewhat ruin that. I could probably continue speculating on how to make the story better, but if I'm honest, it doesn't really bug me that much. I'm just a hypercritical cunt, so I'll move on. There's one more thing I want to touch on. At the end of the credits, there's a 4-digit code. If you enter it into a gate at the start of the game, you unlock New Game Plus mode, which, you know, I've never personally been subjected to Chinese water torture before, but my god, this is one of the most fucking ruthless challenge modes I've ever played. It's a real shame too, because on paper I really like it, and even in execution it can be enjoyable, but I didn't get far into it at all. I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's what this mode is about. The sheer volume of items is reduced drastically and replaced with high quantities of extremely tough enemies. These changes on their own turn Total Chaos into a true survival horror game, forcing you to do a lot with very little, dreading every combat encounter, slowly slithering around the map on a pixel of health. So why don't I like it? Every level now has a time limit. If you don't complete the level within the given time, a fucking invincible Dead by Daylight killer spawns out of nowhere and chases you relentlessly until you finish the level. If he makes contact, he insta-kills you. So on one end, this mode screams at you to be slow and methodical because of how clogged the levels are with enemies, but on the other side, the game is screaming at you to speedrun every level or be hunted. There's an audience for this sort of thing, and I don't think I'm it. I only got like halfway through chapter 2 before I got bored and stopped. It sucks because if the hunter didn't exist, I could see myself genuinely really enjoying this mode. Some of the new enemy encounters are the perfect brand of evil. With that out of the way, I think I've talked about everything I wanted to. Fucking finally, right? Despite what small issues I had with the inventory and the story, Total Chaos is one of the best passion projects I've ever played, and it's completely free on ModDB. Even though it's technically a mod, you don't actually need the original Doom games to run it. So if you're into games like this, you're losing nothing by trying it, and also keep an eye on Wadaholic's next project, a retro arena shooter called Turbo Overkill. All I know is that there's a weapon that's a twin-barreled combination minigun flamethrower, and the main character has a fucking chainsaw in his leg for the purposes of exceptionally ultra-violent slide kicking, so that's pretty cool. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you try Total Chaos. See ya. Man, being a Coast Guard is crazier than I thought. Well, at least I haven't ran into any short-stacked skeletons yet.